Aloha and welcome to Big Wave Small Talk. It's a podcast about big waves and how to survive them. This episode is brought to you by the University of California, Los Angeles MARC program, which stands for Mindful Awareness Research Center. It's in partner with the Jane and Terry Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA. Today's guest is a mindful coach and facilitator with different tools such as meditation. We're going to talk to him to see how we can use mindfulness in the sport of surfing, especially big wave surfing. How can you tune out of the fear and doubt and tune in to the flow state?
You're not in control. The only thing you're in control of is the ability to surrender. That's all you got. You're not going to get in a flow state if you're totally chill as you're paddling out to a big wave. If there's a little edge, like a little sense like, oh shit, this is intense. Like I got to really be on this. That's what you want. You want to be in that place where you realize I can't lose focus. I got to be on this. The sports teams at UCLA are always looking for an edge. It's a D1 team that's got a pretty great championship history. And so the coach was looking for someone who could specifically speak that language. And since I have a background in kinesiology, I have an undergraduate degree in kinesiology and exercise science, they thought I'd be a great fit. And the coach and I really meshed together really well. And so it's been 5 seasons of applying mindfulness training to both recovery, training, and peak performance.
It was great to see your TED Talk about the flow state. I find that to be a key part of many sports with concentration, but especially in surfing, where your focus can mean getting the wave of your life or taking the worst wipeout and potentially, in the worst case scenario, drowning or being in a just terrible situation in which you need support from a friend or a lifeguard. How can we achieve this flow state, and what's your definition of it?
It's sort of the holy grail of like psychological experiences, because it's not just limited to extreme sports. It's also something you can find in martial arts. You can find it in art. You can find it in public speaking, all kinds of things, music. So really it's defined as a state where you're basically completely one with the experience you're doing. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that whatever you're executing, that part of your mind that normally is noticing things and commenting on things and comparing things like, oh, I could have done that better, or make sure to line up your arms with the pool cue or whatever it is, or if you're paddling out and you're just noticing how it feels, your arms are kind of tired because maybe you did too many push-ups the day before, whatever it is, that commentary is helpful in training. It's not helpful in peak performance. And so when you're in a flow state, that's gone. It's just quiet. And the sense of you and the thing you're doing being separate from, let's say, the waves or the sounds or whatever it is that's going on, that's part of the full experience. There's no separation between you and that experience. It's just all one full-blown experience, and time slows down. And you tend to be, the skills that you express are the highest level. So it's like you're getting this double whammy of having this amazing psychological experience, but you're also in total peak performance. Mm-hmm. So how do we get there? That's the thing. It's like when you read about flow and you look at the science of flow, it's not easy to get there because you can't just make it happen. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to create the conditions for flow to happen more often. And so one of the things, there's like pretty much 6 conditions for flow, and then we got to think about how to train for it. So the 6 conditions are that you need to have a really high level of skill of whatever you're talking about. Even if it's one aspect of a skill, you can have like a flow moment when it's effortless, right? So you have to have enough of that embodied skill. It's got to be in your nervous system. And then there's got to be enough of a high stakes, because if it's not high enough stakes, it's not going to tell your nervous system you need to bring everything you got. So the stakes could be physical, like in surfing. If you're a professional, it could be physical and financial and social, your status, right? So if there's something that you can lose, then you have a better chance of dropping into a flow state. So you've got high level skill, high stakes. You need to have a complex changing environment that requires you to problem solve all the time. That's a wave, right? There's so much complexity going on. You need to have powers of focus and concentration. They're related, but they're different. So focus is about seeing and reading the water clearly, reading what's going on, and then the ability to not get distracted. So that concentration is about ignoring the things that aren't related to that, right? Just totally taking in just the data you need. And then you also need to have this ability to kind of drop the need for commentary. So that earlier thing I described, where that part of the mind that comments and assesses and names things takes you out of the moment. It takes a certain amount of brain chemistry and brain circuitry that violates what we need for flow. So when we're in a situation that we're familiar with, meaning that, I'm doing my thing, I'm doing my sport, I want to just let my mind orient me without having to have any inner dialogue. The one exception would be if I have certain mantras or phrases that kind of coach myself that might be really useful to kind of bring in some mind states that I've practiced, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But in general, I want to drop the need to comment. You see and you hear and you feel everything. You don't need to have inner dialogue talking about it. You just drop it. Part of the training will be about how to do that, right? I love to talk about this great Greek lyric poet named Archilochus, who said, "We don't rise to the level of our fantasies or our aspirations. We fall to the level of our training," right? So we got to train in all these different things with discipline.
The first thing that comes to mind is the high stakes that we have in big wave surfing and the ability for those athletes to really tune into the conditions and concentrate, because the stakes are so high. It's life or death. If you're out there in the lineup worrying about the waves, and then you start also thinking about sharks and all the other factors, what if I hit the bottom? What if my inflation vest, the CO2 cartridge doesn't inflate? There's just so many variables and so many things that can go wrong, that it's not just losing a championship. It's, your life, an injury, things that can be really terrifying. So does this flow state help you push through the fear, or is there a way to actually channel that fear and transform fear into something that you can use positively?
We have to recognize the kind of the different stages that can include, moments where I step outside of my process when I'm out there, and all the things that I'm trying to juggle, trying to get a hold of my mind, and I start getting in my head, as they say, right? When I get too much into my head, I'm thinking about things that ultimately, some of which I hopefully I've checked my gear. I've got to work on my skills that help me so I can trust myself, right? So that I'm less likely to think about all the things that can go wrong, and focus on reading and reacting, right? That's really where I need to go. So I can take that fear, turn it into focus, and then find flow. So it's fear, focus, flow, right? So how do we do that though? We need to get really granular on how to do that and train that. So obviously I need to get really good at my sport specific skills and get as tight in that as I can and understand where my strengths and weaknesses are. And one of those things that I like, that I'm sure a lot of your listeners might be familiar with to some degree, is Wim Hof breathing. The Wim Hof system is great because it really does, aside from dealing with cold temperatures and activating the immune system, one of the things that I found that's profound about it is that it really helps me hold my breath for long periods of time and reduce the amount of oxygen I need. So, in my very first Wim Hof training, I went from, a breath hold of 45 seconds to 2.5 minutes, only 20 minutes of training. It was pretty amazing. So that kind of, thinking about what that means, how it can apply to this game would be helpful. But it also is interesting too, because I can use just the basic training of Wim Hof breathing, which is a big parasympathetic activation, to bring my mind back online if I start getting in my head, right? So if I start, there's a bunch of things that we want to be able to do when I'm out there, and I'm starting to feel a little edgy, or I'm feeling stiff in my body. I'm not feeling loose. And I notice my mind is starting to go through a bunch of different scenarios. We don't want to be in a place where, and this is where mindfulness really comes in. If I'm monitoring and noticing what's going on, I see my mind predicting things and seeing, or maybe repeating bad experiences from the past or whatever it might be. I don't want to be there. There's no use for that at all. I need to be watching the water, being aware of other surfers, and be really present and reading and reacting. So there's a couple things I can do. If I practice Wim Hof breathing, which has given me the ability to manage cold temperatures, also activate my nervous system, also hold my breath longer, I can just start breathing without doing the whole training. And that activates a whole neural network in the mind and body that put me in control, that put me in a place where I'm doing something. Part of what the mind wants is a forward action in the process of getting up on that board. If I'm thinking about stuff that can go wrong, if I'm worried about stuff that's going to happen, my mind is no longer engaged in that way. So I need something I can do actively to take a step forward. Another thing I can do if I'm in that place is there is what's called panoramic vision. So I can kind of just sit on my board and try and look out in front of me and see the whole panoramic view and bring it all into strong focus, vivid focus, and see the whole thing. And then what that does, it activates brain centers that cause dopamine to rush in, and it creates an optimal state for performance. And it calms you down. If you're also doing if you have a pre-performance ritual, that's really helpful. It might be everything from really practical stuff like getting your board out of your van or something and doing all kinds of things to kind of prep yourself. But having some time to breathe, focus, and even do some visualizations or bring forth some ideas about, are there words or phrases I want to use? That's part of my prep that I can use to kind of get my mind in gear. If I do this every time I go out, right, it becomes something that slips into my nervous system and it slips on like a glove. When I'm out there, I can do the same thing. I can recall it and come right back into that state. There's another thing called kind of getting back on the horse, which is, that old thing of if you fall off a horse, you're terrified to get back on, you got to get right back on. Why? Well, again, it's that the mind wants to go forward into something. Otherwise, it's going to get lost in playing and replaying all the ways it could go wrong again, right? But if I give my body and attention network something to do that leads me to my goal, it's all going to go back into place. And a great example of that is that rock climber, Alex Honnold, who is the great solo free climber who had the amazing, free solo documentary. And he talks about being on the face of Yosemite, I think it was El Capitan, and he was on this ledge, and all of a sudden he stopped for a break. He was only 300 feet from the summit, 2,000 feet up. And he just took a break just to look at the view, and he had a panic attack. He had been climbing for 1,800 feet, where he was at death's door from 30 feet up. Now he's at 1,800 feet. He's on a ledge. He's totally safe, but that's when he has the panic attack. Why? It's because as he was looking out at the beautiful vista, he started imagining what it would be like to fall. He started imagining what would happen when his mom got the call and he had a panic attack. So, and he's got no ropes. The guy in the camera is a good 75 feet away. He's got no help. So the only thing he could do is get back on the horse. For him, what is that? He literally turned his face and looked right at the granite and looked at the granular, sparkly composition of all that rock. And he started to put his hand on the rock. He started to feel the rock. And he brought back all that neural circuitry that knows exactly how to read and react. Dump the thinking, get rid of it. It's not useful. Go back to what you see, what you feel, what you hear. And he climbed up to the summit and took care of business. So that's what we need to do.
Getting back into the body. And I think that through the UCLA MARC program, mindful practice, just bringing it back to the breath, like you said, it'd be really interesting to try that while you're on the board, out in the water, during the lull between the waves, especially when the waves are big and you might have 30 minutes with just waiting. And you get caught up with who's in the lineup, you have a conversation with someone talking about their last wave, and all of a sudden the distraction amongst, the surfers in the water or the elements can be so intense that you find yourself out of place, or the breathing is no longer the focus, which a lot of apnea trainers and free dive trainers out here on Oahu have specific courses for surfers to engage in certain types of breathing at every stage of the paddle. So paddling out, you know, just making sure that you have a rhythm with not only the breath, but the strokes. And then once you are out and have time to sit on your board, how much CO2 can you expel and how much oxygen can you breathe in, so that if you are in a bad situation, you can get as much oxygen as possible to take potentially a two-wave hold down, where max 1 minute of just turbulence, and that turbulence in that moment, especially under a big wave, it's not just 1 minute of breath hold, it's 1 minute of just getting absolutely pounded, potentially the wind knocked out of you. That's the moment that's really interesting to me with psychology of big wave surfers, is where do they go in that life-threatening moment where if they panic, they could drown. But if they just relax and go with the flow, then they'll probably be fine. So put yourself in that position. You're going just like in a washing machine, and you know, maybe you even have an injury, maybe your board hit you, and all you're trying to do is relax. How would you recommend just being able to relax the body at that point?
It's a huge trust exercise, right? I mean, that's kind of what it is. So you're going to surrender your body to the currents and the turbulence, and you're going to surrender your ability to hold your breath by relaxing your muscles so that you're not building up a lot more CO2 pressure that's going to cause a panic feeling, right? The panic feeling, if you could just think about it for a second, in a thought exercise here. If there was just no limit to like your ability to hold a breath, and it never felt like you were straining to hold your breath, if it just was like the easiest thing in the world, the turbulence would almost be kind of fun, right? Because there's no threat of breathing, and as long as you're not hitting some reef, right? If we're just thinking about the turbulence by itself, it could be interesting, right? It could be it's a powerful kind of weird thing. So the key is, how do I not panic about breathing, right? And so there it really is relaxation, because the more my muscles are tense, the more I resist, the more CO2 I build up very, very quickly. And hopefully I've expelled some CO2, like you said, in my breath process. But the more I can relax, the better. And then I'm also trying to relax the mind. And what that means is a total letting go of control. Just being the complete observer of the experience. And that's, again, where mindfulness really, really is helpful. So if we get into the definition of mindfulness, it is a special state of attention and a special state of consciousness. Now, we all have it naturally in moments, but what we're trying to do is train it volitionally. We're trying to actually get there intentionally. To do that, I gotta do the practices. And this state of attention is kind of a meta attention, meaning that I'm not only attending to something, could be something external to me, it could be something within my body, but I'm also attending to the quality of attention itself. So I'm kind of monitoring that. And so, in the various formal practices, I'm learning how to track my attention and see that my attention is really a filter. It's not a spotlight, it's not a laser pointer, it's a filter. It filters some things in while trying to leave some things out. So if I'm trying to filter my breath, I'm trying to feel the breath sensations, not as a thought or as a visualization, but as real body sensations. I'm trying to filter out thoughts about sandwiches and thoughts about, vacations and thoughts about bills to pay, right? Now, of course, what happens is, until we get better at it, that filter gets sucked into my thought process. And before I know it, I'm no longer focused on my breathing. I'm actually involved in a very elaborate thought process. And that thought process is really not bad. It's just that we want to have the choice to be really embodied and present with all of our senses and all of our skills that have been trained, or be in a place where I'm problem solving and thinking and planning and remembering, or that kind of intermediate stage where I'm actually using a little bit of thinking, but I'm also really involved in my body. So when I'm in that crux place, that crucible of being dumped by a massive wave, when I draw my practice, what I'm doing is I'm totally disidentifying from all the thoughts that, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Or this is really bad, or whatever it is. Those thoughts might still be generated by my brain, because the brain generates them for us. But I'm not going with those thoughts. I'm just resting in this total present moment experience of the body, some of which is unpleasant. I'm relaxing and yielding to that unpleasantness, and I'm not identifying with any of those thoughts. They just come and go, and I'm just the observer of them. And so there's this deep, it's kind of a dialectic, active passivity. I'm actively choosing to be passive with my body and passive with letting these thoughts come and go without me attaching to them.
It's a great point that it's not only the muscle strain that can burn the oxygen with those, vital moments and vital breaths, but also the panic in the mind that can then burn more oxygen and increase the possibility of something actually going wrong. Which brings me to thinking about the psychology of first responders and people like lifeguards who are potentially sitting in a tower watching the waves all day long. Maybe everything's going smoothly, but then in a second, they're called to duty. I know you've done this work with the LAPD, and I was curious as to how you recommend that people in those situations can best respond to an emergency.
Well, I think the key thing there is the struggle for the right level of vigilance so they don't miss something, right? That they're not coming onto the scene late when someone is struggling, and there's signals out there that might indicate distress. Someone's, most likely they're going to be caught in a riptide, or they've gone too far out, they're not strong swimmers, or they've got a cramp, or something's going on. Maybe someone's having a mild heart attack, or who knows. So there's going to be signals that they have to almost be looking for all the time, and yet most of the time what they're seeing is the noise. They're not seeing signals because the signals, thank goodness, are relatively infrequent. But that creates this particular problem for the first responder who's got to be kind of like a watch guard or a sniper or someone who's going to, their moment of action is very, very infrequent. And so it's easy for the mind to wander, because that's what it does. It's easy to be bored. So I'm no longer really taking in the details in a way that makes them salient. So the first thing is, how do I maintain this vigilance? How do I maintain this readiness? I was talking to someone who was talking about their own experience trying to practice mindfulness continuously throughout the day, and they found it exhausting. Mm-hmm. And so that's a great piece of information. And if you've studied mindfulness meditation and you've moved into moving meditation, like walking meditation, eating meditation, and then you start doing other kinds of things like trying to make a sandwich with mindfulness, or trying to play with your kid or your dog, or get onto a surfboard, right? So if you find it exhausting, it's because you're bringing something to it that's not needed at all, which is a lot of reactivity and judgment. Mm-hmm. Because the truth is, right now, Shannon, you've been aware all this time, and your body is doing all these things for you, your brain's doing all these things for you, and it's been pretty effortless. You've been breathing all this time, it's been effortless. And you know how to do a lot of the things that you're doing. And lifeguards have been very well trained, so they know what they're doing. And the fact is that if we just get this faculty of attention to just flip just a little bit, to monitor itself, and then have the difference between the feeling of sort of drifting off and the feeling of vividness. And then there we are. That's the sweet spot. That's all it is. It's effortless. So, we all, if we drive cars, we all know what that's like, right? We all know what it's like to sort of be like, kind of, oh man, I gotta focus on the road because I was just kind of tripping for a second, thinking about something, or someone was talking to me and I was distracted, or any other reason why I might be distracted. And all of a sudden there's this sense, because this half ton of metal is moving, my body calls me back to focus, right? And so that feeling between sort of doing something but not totally being 100% there and being 100% there, we want our lifeguards to actually feel the difference between standing and scanning the horizon and kind of thinking about something else at the same time, mm-hmm. and scanning the horizon and feeling the joy and the delight actually in just being really there, feeling the sun on your face, feeling the wind on your skin, being aware of people having a good time, and really reading the water and reading the people with your skill. And like that just feels good. It feels awake and alive. And so I have to start coming back to that feeling again and again. And the nervous system likes to simplify, because we want higher order stuff to be possible. If I had to think about tying my shoelaces every time I did it, we wouldn't get very far in terms of complexity. So my brain likes to habituate. Okay, I know how to do this. Let's think about something else while I'm doing this. That's what allows the mind to wander, is habituation. It gets to become a habit. Well, in the same way, anything you do, including the work that a lifeguard does, it gets to become kind of a habit, and it gets to be habitual. So I need to learn my own habits using mindfulness. What are my habits around 3 p.m.? What are my habits when it's just half an hour before my shift is over? What are my habits of mind as I'm talking to a local who's coming up to me, asking me questions? So I learn my habits, and I try and stay really curious instead of going with the habits. And what's interesting is curiosity can't habituate. Curiosity is a state where you're taking in lots of information and you realize it's always new. It's always different. Same beach, same shifts, different set of variables every single time. So if I can really tap into the feeling of curiosity, which is the same thing as the feeling of presence, the same thing of really experiencing life as it's flowing into me, that's going to feel way better than being kind of lost in thought. Mm-hmm. Now, being lost in thought isn't bad as long as I choose to let it happen, or I notice that it happens and I'm cool with it. But if it happens because I don't even realize it's happening, that's not so great.
I'd just love to extend my gratitude to all the lifeguards and first responders, not only on Oahu, but around the world. This is really great insight into how difficult the job is. And especially now at the time of COVID, when they're risking their life as well, not only potentially a rescue scenario, but just from answering a question from a beachgoer, we can all do our part to support them. If you are listening and you're a surfer and you'd like to get more information about big wave risk assessment, there's actually a group going around called BRAG that goes around the world and trains everything from free diving. There's some meditation with Greg Long, and then there's also a lot of different scenarios where we actually put each athlete into a worst case scenario where surfers become the first responders, and we're learning how to rescue people that are unconscious from the water with only your surfboard, just so that if it does happen in real life circumstance, we're prepared, we're trained. Like you mentioned, Brian, we can go into that effortless flow, not necessarily overthinking it, but just settling back and be like, I've trained for this. And CPR courses, I mean, it's just so important to keep those fresh and new and continue the training in between each season, like now in the summer. So thank you so much for coming on to the show. And I'd love to just give the audience a little bit more information about the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. I know there's some drop-in meditations with Professor 𝗪𝗪 and Diana Winston as well, which has been incredible. The UCLA MARC Center also has an app where you can tune in and practice your mindfulness and meditate, you know, if it's 5 minutes in the morning, or if you are ready for something longer, even retreats. Definitely check out the UCLA MARC program. And yeah, I think that's it. Do you have any other closing remarks, recommendations for the surfers listening?
The power of the water and the beauty of the water are the perfect place to find that transcendent experience. And so, and it's being done for centuries. And so, you know, there's a huge legacy of amazing people who've led the way before you. So combine wisdom traditions with modern technology and athletic ability and trust in yourself, and, you know, go have the time of your life and be safe. Yeah.
And do everything you can to tune into that flow state. Thank you so much, Brian.